Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started now. This is the Spring NARDAC update event. We hold this event twice a year in the spring and in the fall. So it's a chance for a wide audience to catch up on what the North American RDA Committee has been doing. And we also use this opportunity to have guests speak and to provide other presentations, other learning opportunities, and an opportunity for people to ask questions and get lots of excellent answers. Just want to advise everyone at this point, and I'll remind again later, to use the Q&A option. The chat is a little bit more limited. Maybe if you have a technical problem, use the chat. But for questions, we'll be primarily using the Q&A option in this online webinar. So let's just go down one more slide. There we go. So I will be doing the update for NARDAC. After me will be Charlotte Christensen from the National Library of New Zealand. She'll be giving a presentation, Practical Implementation of Official RDA at the National Library of New Zealand. So the topic is implementation. I just want to remind everyone on the RDA Toolkit homepage itself, under the RSC heading, if you click that now, there is an option there called Implementing Official RDA. So please do check that out. It's starting to fill out with some excellent content and presentations. So who is NARDAC? Well, NARDAC has currently 8 members. Representing the American Library Association, we have Robert Maxwell from Brigham Young University, Adam Schiff from University of Washington. Representing Canada, the Canadian Committee on Cataloging, is myself, Thomas Brendorfer, working at the Guelph Public Library. And we also have Hong Shui from Library and Archives Canada. Representing the Library of Congress is Trina Soderquist and also Melanie Paluda. Both of them work for the Policy Training and Cooperative Programs Division. NARDAC is in the process of expanding. We have currently 2 co-opted members, one representing the library science education sector in the North American area, and that's Sean Mixa from the University of North Texas. And we also have someone representing French language cataloging, and that's Daniel Paradis, and currently working at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. And NARDAC members have tasks and jobs to do. Currently, myself and Daniel, we are splitting the duties of chairing NARDAC. The primary responsibility of NARDAC is to send a representative to the RDA Steering Committee, and that's Robert Maxwell. Backup representative is Melanie Paluda, who also handles the web content. So what has NARDAC been up to in the last year or so? Well, actually half a year, let's say, because we do the fall update. Well, a lot of our activity has to do with proposals. So we have one proposal that is just being has gone through the RDA Steering Committee, is in its final stages. That was a proposal on the Roman numerals that are associated with names in the instructions, and the concern was that that's a problem because Roman numerals is a convention that's very Western in focus and very Anglo-American in focus. So the proposal was to make this instruction more international in scope and to use the term regnal number. And so the instruction proposal was to change the instruction and to update the definition, or to provide a definition of regnal number. That was discussed at the last RSC meeting. It's in its final stages right now. So proposals in their infancy, let's say, or their beginning stages, we have NARDAC is looking at 3 proposals. 2 of them have been discussed at length so far, and we're getting these ready to submit to the RDA Steering Committee. One proposal has to do with the way sources of information is referenced in a variety of RDA elements. It was noted in the past when a lot of manifestation transcription elements were provided for in the original toolkit. They pointed to the sources of information instructions. In the official toolkit, the nature of those elements was changed because some of them remained as attribute elements, some of them became relationship elements to nomen or shortcut elements. And so there was some inconsistency that we spotted in terms of how it's referencing data provenance and sources of information. And so the proposal was to go through and clean that up, but also provide the necessary breadcrumbs, so to speak, that will point users of the toolkit to that section in data provenance for a preferred source of information. Another proposal that is in its final stages at the NARDAC level is to tidy up some language in the element variant access point for corporate body, and to essentially move that instruction, but also to rework it a bit. It was noted that traditionally and in the original toolkit, there was an instruction there for entering a variant access point for corporate body directly, but it was also clear that it seemed to be the examples were really driving what people were expected to do. So this fix, so to speak, will help clarify that. And so that is being ready to be sent to the RDA steering committee. And just even hours ago, NARDAC was working out another proposal, which was to expand, really to restore some of the language that was in the definition for corporate body. There was some effort to maybe rework that language, but this is just getting off the ground now. So we're looking for some feedback on this. The idea that corporate bodies also can be expanded to cover certain kinds of events and things like vessels and so on. So this is an effort to look at that language again. So other news. In North America, of course, the French language is an important part of the input, especially with Quebec. So with the February release of the toolkit, the French version is completely up to date with the English version. Examples were translated or adapted when necessary, and there's some substitutions of examples. The Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, the main library in Quebec, published the community resources, which provide French translation for instructions that were part of original RDA, but later determined to be outside of the scope of RDA goals. That's in the community resources section, covering things like capitalization, abbreviations, symbols, ordinal numbers, initial articles, access points for persons in certain categories, terms of rank, honor, or function. These are not in base RDA. These are considered community resources and up to communities to maintain. So looking ahead, so coming up very soon, so NARDAC is doing a joint workshop with the PCC SCT RDA training task group on monographs. So that event is been approved. So it'll be held February the 6th. June 27th, all day. It's current. If you try to register for it right now, it's not there, but it will be shortly. And so this will be a full day workshop dealing with things like bridge training, identifying changes in cataloging practice, etc., and also incorporating things like the PCC policy statements and metadata guidance documentation. There will be examples, hands-on exercises, interactive Q&A. So now that's everything for now. As I said earlier, we do have a fall update that we typically put on. So if anyone in the audience has a topic they can send that suggestion on to NARDAC, perhaps even post it in the Q&A. So we are looking for any suggestions. Last fall we did artificial intelligence. This time we're going to be looking at implementation. So if you have questions at this point, I don't see any pressing or I don't see any questions at all. But just to remind everyone to use the Q&A on the in the software here, just pop that open. And as we go along, just enter your questions. And at the very end, after the next presenter, I will go over those questions and hopefully we'll have a great discussion. So that is the update from NARDAC. At this point, I will stop sharing. We'll hand the screen over to, here we go. I've stopped sharing. And so Charlotte Christensen is up with her presentation, Practical Implementation of Official RDA at the National Library of New Zealand. And I will.
Thank you, Thomas. Tēnā koutou katoa, greetings to you all. My name is Charlotte Christensen, and I'm pleased to be able to be here today to talk at this forum about our implementation of Official RDA at Puna Mātauranga o Aotearoa National Library of New Zealand. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to refer to my institution as NLNZ for the remainder of this presentation. This is also the abbreviation you will see on our policy statements and documentation. But before we begin, as is customary here, I will say a very short whakatauki in Māori to focus us all on the sharing to come. Aha koe iti no te āwhina mā te aroha e whakanui, nō reira e hoa mā, kia ora rā. On the screen here are the three previous presentations relating to NLNZ's implementation of Official RDA, the most recent being last week's presentation at the public session of the RSC meeting. I mention them because together they build a fuller picture than I can give in any one presentation. I would recommend viewing these at some point if you have not already had the opportunity to do so. For today, I'll begin by briefly highlighting some of the points made in previous sessions because they are key to understanding our philosophy behind our implementation. Firstly, our approach is to have everything RDA related accessible within the toolkit itself. Secondly, our training heavily emphasized RDA, totally excluding any consideration of encoding until the very end, because encoding methods can change, but the data that is important to our descriptions should remain the same. In terms of training, it was entirely our intention to train for understanding, to ensure that every cataloguer wasn't just repeating past actions, but was able to fully engage with the new standard and the underlying model of LRM, and so we dwelt on concepts and language to build that understanding. Which leads to the next thing, which is that at NLNZ, everyone contributes. While most of the policy and documentation writing is done by the senior staff, everyone, down to the most junior of cataloguers, is exposed to all of the material and theory and can make informed suggestions for policy change or improvement. Our choice to give everyone that deep understanding did, of course, add to how long it took to get through our training. But it is important to recognise that whatever level you train at, transition will take time. Learning about a new concept is one thing. Applying it in a practical environment is another, and may require refreshers, reminders, and ongoing evaluation of which aspects may still be challenging. For us, we knew when we implemented that we did not have everything perfectly finished, but we'd gone far enough that the people we were training could contribute to finding problems and helping to fix them. We didn't want to delay until it was perfect, and honestly we couldn't have, because it was when the practical cataloguing started that we discovered gaps we hadn't realised existed. Allowing practitioners to contribute to discussions meant a broader range of perspectives and a better result in our documentation. Finally, while it took a long time to get here, The end result is that our policies reflect intentional choices, right down to the option by option level. We have analysed the implications of different choices, and we have determined which ones best fit our needs, the community we serve, and the interoperability of our data with other systems. We have tested every past practice to see if it is still fit for purpose, abandoned some which don't fit our needs, and taken new approaches where they offer better future possibilities. Looking closer at how we structured our training, it's important to remember that we didn't leap directly into the practical. It was absolutely critical to ensure we had a strong foundation of understanding so we could progress together. Starting with phase one, we recognised that a major barrier in moving to official RDA is that many cataloguers don't like the new language and structures. That's okay as a first reaction. It is different and challenging, but it's less of a challenge than it first appears. Cataloguers trained under AACR2 had to learn particular language in order to understand those rules. This is the same thing. That new jargon becomes familiar and comfortable as you interact with it. The plain truth is that you cannot interact effectively with the instructions in the toolkit if you don't understand what they say. So knuckling down and engaging with the new terminology from the start is important. To do that, you're going to need people who can encourage the cataloguers to make the effort. NLNZ's experience has been that everyone can engage with the official RDA standard in much the same way as they have done with previous standards. It's about the foundations being solid, and so supporting people to engage through that learning phase is critical. Phase two was about building on that understanding and making a deeper dive into concepts we were about to actively use. Phase one had been a slow-paced and bite-sized experience, but phase two was deliberately intensive because we wanted concepts clear and fresh before cataloguers began directly engaging with the toolkit. So we did all of phase two across a single week and immediately prior to beginning the practical training phase. To this point, only the policy group had been engaging directly with the toolkit and the NLNZ documentation, but as we moved to the practical training component, it became much more interactive. During the first part of the initial training, we worked with a pattern of having new information disseminated at the start of the week, practical activities for everyone to engage with whatever was taught, and then small group discussions to get feedback on how the week had gone. The Monday tutorials were led by a rotation of the policy group members and were always recorded so that trainees could go back over anything that they had missed. The change in presenters gave trainees a chance to hear messages in different ways and took pressure off any one person being the lead for the training. This was a collaborative effort all the way through. Similarly, the policy group were distributed across the small discussion groups. These sessions were both a chance to gauge how well concepts and activities had been understood, and also to capture any documentation problems that had been encountered. Sometimes the feedback resulted in a single concept being extended over a second week as we made changes and retested our approach. When we got to implementation itself, we moved to a peer checking model. Issues were still fed back to the policy group, and we retained the small group concept, but now as optional clinics where questions and issues could be discussed and worked out together. This was never a top-down experience. Cataloguers were encouraged to think about the issues for themselves and to suggest resolutions to the problems they found. While the clinics were very well attended early on, the need for them diminished quickly. What was initially a vital tool simply became redundant as confidence and familiarity grew. We are now well beyond that implementation phase, but there is still activity ongoing, and two aspects of that activity seem particularly worth mentioning. The first is that all the way through our training journey, we had a dedicated discussion channel where recordings, slides, and notes can be put, and where questions can be asked and answered. We can look back over how our thinking has developed and where practical use of our documentation led to policy change. This tool has been and continues to be really valuable. The second is that we implemented initially only for a narrow range of material, static, text-based resources. But training has been ongoing for other types of material, building on what is now known and understood. There are subgroups who are repeating the earlier pattern of tutorials, activities, and discussion groups for resources such as notated music, rare books, and diachronic works. The same iterative development is also occurring for these areas, with documentation being improved through practical engagement, and so once each subgroup implements, the training materials are then collated and made available while new subgroups are formed. In this way, we will work through the remaining resources for which internal training has not yet been completed. When it comes to actual cataloguing of resources, we make regular use of what we call MAPs, our metadata application profiles. These are subsets of the overall NLNZ application profile, focusing on the key elements important for particular types of metadata description sets. Our training began with a focus on static text-based resources, but just to cover that slice of our daily work, we have 4 separate maps, 1 for non-aggregates and 3 for different types of aggregate: augmentation, collection, and parallel. This would have been too much to take in on day 1 of the practical training, so instead we started with training maps. These training maps were heavily curated, listing only the elements covered by the training, and trainees were expected to only use the elements listed rather than exploring other elements at this stage. For example, at week 1, we had a very limited range of manifestation elements and no elements from any other entity, while by week 7, we had almost completely covered manifestation, as well as all attribute elements for work, expression, and item. Then in weeks 8 to 11, we focused on access points, and so our maps stepped away from the elements we were familiar with to focus only on those that helped us with that learning. While the live toolkit versions of these training maps are not publicly accessible, there are PDF versions available through our Niche Academy tutorials. These are still hyperlinked, so you're able to make use of them directly. But there's nothing to stop you developing your own maps if you want to cover more or less content than we did in a particular lesson. The key here is that this is simply a training tool, so make use of it where it's useful and adjust it where it isn't. We have certainly made adjustments as we went. Remember that we didn't wait to have everything in place, every decision made, before we started training. We started with a core and built on as the training progressed. Staying flexible has worked out well. Moving beyond training though, let's look at the workflow of actually cataloguing an item. When starting to catalogue, there are a number of decisions that need to be made before I even work on recording my first value. I need to start by deciding whether my resource is static or diachronic, and then determining how many works are involved in the resource I'm describing. Because I'm supported by the NLNZ policies and guidance, I make use of the NLNZ aggregate guidance to convert that knowledge of how many works I have into which metadata application profile, or MAP, I need to use in my description. Finally, I need to check whether there is an existing description available to me, and if so, whether I can use it or whether I'm required to begin a new description. So here's a resource to use as an example. It's a static work, there's no indication of it being diachronic. It's text-based. There are no illustrations other than the cover image, and there are no other works, so no introductions or other textual content that would give me multiple works. So following through the aggregates guidance, I come to the conclusion that I have a non-aggregate, and I will be using the static non-aggregate text map. The next step is to work through the elements on that map and do my thinking about my RDA values. In our training, we used a simple worksheet to list our RDA values and keep our thinking separate from the encoding of those values. I've mostly completed my worksheet for this resource, but I still have a few elements to complete, 2 of which we'll do together. In other words, we're going to do some actual cataloguing. Now, while I'm sure some of you are excited to hear me say that, keep in mind that we only have a limited amount of time. So this is more about the flow of the work than a lesson. For some of you, I will be going too slowly, and you'll be wondering how I can possibly get through a cataloging backlog if I'm spending this long on each element. For most, I suspect I will be going too fast and skipping through things you're unfamiliar with, and all I can do is apologize. The truth is, when you're first learning to use the toolkit, you have to work much slower than I will today. And when you're familiar with it, you simply don't spend this long on every element, only on the bits that are unique to the resource you're working on and which you are unfamiliar with. So I'm probably pleasing no one, but I'm hoping you'll get something from this demonstration anyway. The first element I will demonstrate is manifestation file type. The map tells me that this is an element I should consider for the description of my resource. I'm told that I should record it if it is applicable, and that it is possible to record more than one value. Let's transfer to the Live toolkit and follow this through. So here I am at the static non-aggregate text map, and I am going to file type. Going to the element, I read the definition, and since I'm dealing with a digital file, this sounds like it would be applicable. Next, I go to the pre-recording section, which will tell me if there's anything that might change my mind about recording a value here. NLNZ does have a policy statement here, but it relates to integrating resources, so I don't need to worry about that for my resource. Next, I move to the recording section, and I'm told to use the structured description recording method, so I can scroll straight down to that section now. The first option here has a policy statement that tells me to apply the option, but to record it only for the version held by NLNZ. Of the values in this vocabulary encoding scheme, or VES, the one that fits my resource is text file, so that will be my value. While I'm here, though, I note that this VES has a name, RDA file type. That will be important soon. The next option on the page has a policy statement saying do not apply, so I won't even read the option. The third one says apply, and specifically to apply a particular option on the data provenance page. The option here tells me that I need to record a VES that is used as a source of information for a term, and it then tells me that if I need general guidance, I can follow a link to find out more about it. Well, I did take my term from a VES, so because I apply this option, I now have to say what that VES was, and I do that by applying the option in the link in the policy statement. Now, once the page loads, my option is at the top of the screen. Because I was sent to a particular option, I do not scroll up or down. I'm told I'm applying this option, so I read the condition option, which says I need to record the source of information as a work source consulted of the metadata work. Now, to understand what this means, I need to remember that each value I record is part of a metadata statement, and a metadata statement is also a metadata work. So my statement is manifestation, has file type, text file. When I read this option, I'm being told I need to record the source of my value, text file, as a value of the element source consulted. So off I go to that element. At pre-recording here, I'm told that for situations where I want to refer to a source without using an appellation, I need to use the element work note on metadata work. Now, I need to remember that appellation means a name or label. So the question is, did my value, text file, come from a list with a name? Well, yes, it did. We took note of that. It was called the RDA file type vocabulary encoding scheme. So we do have an appellation, and that means I can use the element work source consulted. Our recording method is not so straightforward here. There are 3 different methods listed here at the recording heading, but I'm also advised to go to the NLNZ guidance document. So off I go. Now this page will be slow to load. We're aware of what the problem is, but we're unable to fix it until the next toolkit release. So you'll just have to be patient with me while this page loads. Sometimes it's quicker than other times. And here we are at the NLNZ guidance for source consulted. And I'm looking for the recording section because I came from a policy statement at the recording heading. Here I can see there are separate sections for each recording type method. Under unstructured, I'm told that I use the unstructured method for values, the source of values of title proper, statement of responsibility, and variant title, but I'm looking for a relationship to file type, so I keep reading. Structured description is used only for authority work, and I'm not currently doing that, so I move on to identifier. And here I find my element file type. So this will be my recording method. At the bottom of the list, I'm told to use identifiers from one of 2 different lists, and given the choice, I'm going to choose to look at the genre form code and term source code list. And now that I'm here, I can do a search for the name of my VES, and here I find the code, RDA-FT. So let's put all that back into my worksheet. So I have manifestation, file type, text file. Structured description was the recording method for the value text file. And for my source, I have work, source consulted, RDA-FT. Let's move on to a new element, expression, language of expression. The map tells me that this is a mandatory element for this kind of description, and that I can have more than one value if applicable. So let's go back to the toolkit, and we will have to just click back a few times, and of course it's timed out. To get back to our map and select language of expression. The definition looks good. At the pre-recording policy statement, I've got information about aggregated expressions, but I already know my resource is a non-aggregate, so I don't need to be concerned about any of this. There is some information in RDA at this section, the main point being that if there's a change in value, it might indicate an entity boundary. This is relatively obvious in a practical sense. If I have a record for my resource already in my catalogue, and that particular record is for the German version, and I'm working on an English expression, this will be a different description than for the German one. So that's fine too. I understand what it means, and I don't need to think about it for my resource. What about my recording method? Well, just like with Source Consulted, I have multiple possibilities and the instruction to go to NLNZ guidance to find out what to do. And we get to pause and wait again for a moment. Here at Guidance, under the heading Recording, I get a simple instruction: use identifier recording method. There is some additional information about when and how I can use an unstructured description, but these situations don't apply to my resource, so all I need is to use an identifier. And I go back to the toolkit. I can now go straight down to the section Recording an Identifier. And at the first option, the policy statement tells me that I will apply this using the MARC code list for languages. The option says I will record an identifier or notation from an appropriate VES. My policy statement has told me the VES to use, so off I go to get that. And here I find that the appropriate code for English is ENG. So that's my value. Returning to the toolkit, I continue down the page and I see that the next option is one I don't apply, and then I'm at the end of the section. I'm not recording an IRI, so I'm done. In this case, once I have entered my value and recording method, I'm done. Even though my value came from a VES, I was not instructed to record the source, and so I didn't. So my worksheet is complete, and here are the values that we just worked out together. But I'm not done yet. I still need to put my values into our encoding format, which for NLNZ is Mark 21. So let's talk about Mark for a bit. NLNZ has used Mark 21 for decades, so it would be easy to believe we didn't need to teach our staff encoding. That simply wasn't the reality. RDA and Mark use different language and are not fully aligned. The Mark manual often does not reflect the element names from official RDA, and even when it does, it might define them slightly differently. So you need something to tell you where to put your RDA values in Mark. But that isn't the only reason we kept them so separate, nor why we felt we had to spend a little time on Mark training, in spite of working with staff who had had years of experience using Mark 21. One of the big issues with Mark encoding when you're trying to deal with RDA values is that a lot of what we see in Mark is implicit rather than explicit. If I give you the following Mark coding and value, what RDA value might this be? Well, the obvious answer is that it's a value of title proper, and that would be correct, but it's not all that it is. It could also be considered a part of the value of the element authorized access point for work. In this situation, there have been no previous publications of this resource, so we would not usually add a 240 field, since it would contain exactly the same information as the 245A. But of course, neither the 245A nor the 240 value would have given me the full value of authorized access point for work in this case, because you have to know to string it together with the value in the 100 field as well. Now, as catalogers, we know and can interpret this, but this kind of implicit value recording is difficult for a computer to make use of. The 245A is sometimes only a value of title proper, and in this case, also a value of authorized access point for work. But it's not always part of a value of authorized access point for work. Taking a different but very well-known example, the value of title proper can differ from the title portion of the value of authorized access point for work, and we're very familiar with that happening in resources we describe. All of this is just a single illustration of implicit values in Mark, and it has to be said that after you've put the effort into knowing exactly what your values are and understand why you want to include them, it can be a little disheartening to have to lose that clarity when you type it into your library management software, which is why we spent some time looking at where we can use Mark to be explicit about our data. So far as possible, we want to be able to identify our RDA values even while we continue to use Mark 21. And here's what we did. Firstly, we did not even do much thinking about Mark until after we had decided which RDA element values we wanted to include. Keeping these separate meant we didn't get tangled in trying to figure out where to put things until after we knew we actually wanted to include them. Once we knew what we wanted, we then looked at all the possibilities for where each value could be encoded. This usually started off with fields and subfields we were very familiar with, but then included exploring newer available fields and determining which gave us the best result. As we considered the options, we tried to prioritize solutions that gave us the most explicit and singular result. If the choice was between a field which would be used for many things and a field which would be specific, we generally chose the latter. There were compromises at times, but we did our best to keep our data as clear as possible, which leads to the last step. Wherever possible, and especially where a field can be used in multiple ways, we label the data. This is an ongoing expansion, sometimes including URIs, but often simply an RDA element name in an appropriate labeling subfield is our current approach. The language in these labels is not particularly user-friendly, and we have configured our public displays to avoid them for the most part. In many cases, our previous labels weren't much help to non-catalogers anyway, and by taking this approach, we are future-proofing our new data as far as possible by being explicit about what the value represents. If you're curious about what our choices have been, you can go to our website and see them listed. This page is adjusted every time we make a new choice about marked data because, as with everything, we are refining our approach as implementation reveals new information. But for now, let's go back to our resource and think about my workflow. I chose my map, I filled in my worksheet. Now what do I do? Still within the RDA toolkit, we have a document specifically about how we encode RDA values. There are some introductory sections to cover general information, and at the very bottom we have some further information about non-RDA marks specific to our internal practices, but the majority of the document is organised by RDA element name. So looking at the section for manifestation file type, you can see that in a mark bibliographic record, I'm given instruction on how to handle a structured description value, specifically in the 347 subfield A. It also tells me to include a particular phrase in the subfield 3, and to place my data provenance value in a subfield 2, and to use separate 347 fields for each file type value. Note that this does not repeat everything in the mark manual. That is still there for me to consult when I need to. This simply provides the interface between RDA elements and mark fields. Here at the section for language of expression, we have the possibility of two recording methods, unstructured description and identifier. For our description, we have an identifier value of this element, so we're told to record it in an 041 field, specifically subfield A. And other specific advice is given, like don't repeat the same language value for each expression in an aggregate. Saying once that there's English content is enough. We don't need to do it each time for a short story in a collection, for example. And so what I would do is work through my whole worksheet, check where in mark I should be recording my values, and key them in, referring to the mark manual as needed. But we don't need to take the time to do that here. Let's wrap this up. So thinking again about implementation as a process, there are a few messages we would like to reinforce. Our first message to anyone watching is that we've done this and you can too. You don't have to start where we did and go through the thousands of options line by line. There are now a range of policy statements in the toolkit, so you can test some out and see if any of them mostly fit your needs, and then just adapt the bits that don't. Building on the work of others is both sensible and efficient. Encouragement and support are the most powerful tools to ensure the transition is effective. Staying with original RDA is not a valid option when that version of the standard is going to be removed, so finding a way forward is important. And official RDA is a functional tool which can be used to continue practices catalogers are familiar with. What has changed is the language and the structure of those instructions. As mentioned several times in this talk, when teaching official RDA, it is very important to keep clear about what relates to RDA and what belongs to your encoding standard. Many more experienced catalogers are accustomed to taking shortcuts and talking about where the values might be put. But this can quickly become confusing because there is not a one-to-one match between encoding fields and RDA elements. So when teaching RDA, talk in terms of RDA. Once you have determined your values, then you talk about the encoding. But avoid talking about encoding until you're ready to do that step. Remember, RDA provides the values that are what you want to say about a resource. Encoding's just how you put it into a computer. So the RDA side is the intellectual side of the task. Finally, this is a great opportunity to question what it is you actually do need to say in your descriptions to meet the needs of your user community. Sometimes this might mean adding extra information, but sometimes it means really scrutinizing those things you've always done. Who is using that data you're entering, and in what way? Could information in a note be better used if it was provided in a different form, such as a search facet? There are implications to such choices, but NLNZ has found this to be a great opportunity to cease old practices that weren't really serving any purpose other than consistency for consistency's sake. We have also been looking to a future where we stop entering data into any kind of encoding system at all. Our ideal would be a simple form where we fill in the element values and press a button to get an output in whichever encoding system we've selected. Conversion of old MARC data to a different encoding system is hard, but there are things we can do now while still using MARC that will make future conversion easier. So we're prioritizing those changes. So finally, what next for NLNZ? Well, first, we need to finish developing the documentation and training for our own staff, particularly in areas such as cartographic materials and audiovisual. These are in progress, but not yet complete, as is the documentation and training for rare books, music, and diachronic works. As we complete our own training phase for all materials, we are also turning our attention to how we can support the New Zealand library community to transition as well. Our training materials are made public, but we may be able to provide advice as libraries prepare their own transition plans relevant to their situation. And thirdly, there are a number of matters that have come to our attention, both through the policy development phase and through daily cataloguing, that we feel need consideration by the RDA Steering Committee for change. As we focus less on developing documentation, we will have more capacity to consider which issues need to be prioritised and to working with RDAC, our local region, to get these considered. Often the issues may only be relevant to certain user communities, but RDA is an international standard, and providing new options for handling situations does not necessarily mean change for everyone. It simply provides a path for those who need it. We look forward to contributing to the continuing internationalization of the standard in this way. If after hearing this talk you feel you want to know more about our experience, we're very happy to share. Please do get in touch. Your situation may not be identical to ours, but our training material is freely available through the RDA Toolkit website and can be used by individuals or teams. Our training materials do assume use of our own supporting documentation, but could still be of value to trainers planning training using other policy statement and guidance document sets, so please do have a look and see what might be useful to you. I'll just repeat that contact email address here. To help me answer questions today, I'm joined by our 3 cataloguing team leaders, Anushka Maguire, Teresa Preston, and Eb Curtis. Thank you for your time. It would now be wonderful to have a conversation about any aspect of what I've covered that you'd like to know more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Wonderful, wonderful. I will jump right into questions to get the ball rolling on that. Oh, I see a lot of applause and hearts. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you, everyone. Yes, wonderful. Love the interface here. So let's dive into just a couple of questions. Some of these ended up in chat, so I'll just go over those as well. And I did write down a few topics that we could discuss as well, and and so on. So one of the main questions here is, will the slides be available afterwards? And the answer given so far is that the RDA Toolkit website itself. I do believe that since this is being recorded, this session will also be on YouTube, but the actual presentation will be on the rdatoolkit.org website, listed here under the North America heading, I guess, NARDAC heading. Another question, How long did the initial training phase take? So I guess it's what were the results, maybe more broadly, of the initial training phase?
Do you want me to answer that, Charlotte? Yeah. Kia ora koutou. I'm the team leader who coordinated the training, corralled all our wonderful senior staff, so it's probably a question for me. Aaron, as Charlotte went through, we had several phases of training, and so the first refresher style training took about 8 weeks. That was the Monday webinar. That was just slowly going through the concepts. That's the training that has been released as phase 1 on our Niche Academy thing. It took, as I say, about 8 weeks. I think we added a couple of extra presentations, specifically the cardinality one, and there was something else we added as well. As Charlotte said, it's a very iterative process, and our training has been like that as well. So that initial phase, that was about 8 weeks or so. Then the phase 2, this is the intensive stuff, we did over a week. And then our practical training started mid-February. Gosh, it was only last year, mid-February, and we implemented at the beginning of August. So that gives you an idea of how long it took. We went slowly.
Maybe a follow-up question. I guess when you repeat this training down the road, do you anticipate the training to become shorter, more efficient, and so on? Is this is really an effort also to experiment with the training then?
Definitely. The training has all been crafted with with several ideas in place. So initially our implementation, but also because we have responsibilities for our communities, so getting something together that could sit there for some time for our communities, and also for long term. So for when we have new staff, and we anticipate that with new staff, yes, it will go so much quicker because, of course, it will all be the new thing they're learning, so they won't be trying to keep up with their day jobs at the same time.
I think that's a good lead into another question. And it may be a little early to determine this, but I guess it's anticipating what the long-term effects on productivity for staff trained in the official RDA toolkit would be. Once they're, so I guess maybe to rephrase that a bit, once they're trained in the official toolkit, do you see productivity gains, like actual, I guess, improvements in productivity?
It's still quite early days. What we have noticed is that the people, yeah, so obviously implementation day, everybody was extremely slow, but very quickly as people got to it, got their heads around it, they got back to the kind of productivity they had before we implemented. It's been our catalogers multitask, and so as soon as they get competent in one format, we throw another format at them and they start again in the training phase. So that has had impacts on our productivity. But that general pattern of they start slowly, and then as we refine our policy and training and everything comes together, and then away we go again. So we don't expect to see any losses in productivity once we've finally implemented everything.
I did just to follow up for myself. I did notice Charlotte was very good at following the links all the way through. So I think anyone looking at that the first time and would be overwhelmed to go through all of those. But really, I guess maybe you come around and then you have a result at the end, and it's laid out in like a map or an application profile and so on. So it would seem to me that people trained in that would gradually become more proficient at diving into the toolkit and knowing how to follow the links and then coming out with the result. So I wonder if that's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. And our initial training was very much about getting people used to the toolkit. What did it look like? How did it work? And not worrying about values or anything. We did sort of have to concentrate on holding people back and just getting them used to that. And it is one of those things, and I hate to say it, but you know, I'm the older generation myself, but it is one of those generational things, and that our younger staff just dive into this kind of thing, no problems. And those of us who are a little more mature just take a little bit longer, but we get there.
yeah, yeah. So I have some questions. The panelists apparently are in a different section of the software here. So they can't post in question and answer, but I will read some of their questions. I do have one that popped up in Q&A. What was the most challenging concept to teach and for catalogers to understand? The second part of the question, how did you approach teaching this and what would you do differently? So there's a lot there, but what was challenging and what would you change about it if you were trying to teach it again?
Am I still answering this one?
Yeah,
I've got a lot of windows open here and I can see there's lots of conversation going on around the back and I'm just not quite
yeah.
sure. I don't seem to be in the hot seat. So I think there were a couple of things that were challenging. Data provenance was challenging, and you'll see that the two examples that Charlotte had today, you know, one had data provenance and one didn't. And that whole concept of a metadata statement being a metadata work, and then you can actually say something about that metadata work. That was something that did take people a while to get their heads around. And I'm just trying to think, Charlotte, you've been doing a lot of extra work. I'm just trying to think what's been coming, what else has been coming through.
I think data provenance was a big one. Oddly enough, cardinality really caught people, even though it is such a small thing and really irrelevant to the daily practice, other than understanding when you can have one value and when you can have more. So that was a big one. Access points, getting to grips with that, and we've become much more efficient with talking about that now and the different steps involved in that, rather than trying to learn how do I get an access point for a person, what is the structure for getting an access point for any entity, so that I can apply that to an entity that I don't usually use, like place or time span, if I have to. So that's been a big one. The work around appellations comes to mind. Just getting used to that language and being able to translate it to label or name and know what you're talking about. Once it clicks, it's fine, but it's one of those ones that catches people out. So there were quite a few. I think it's fair to say that what you see in the Niche Academy training materials is the end result without the messiness. So we had a lot of messiness internally, but by the time you get to the Niche Academy stuff, it flows better like it should. And I've had the opportunity to take some staff who, for various reasons, missed parts of the initial training phase. And I've taken them through the new processes and they have just flowed straight through. So it definitely does work.
Okay. You did name drop something called Niche Academy, so maybe you can provide some explanation as to what that is.
Niche Academy it's just a tool which I think was developed somewhere in the North America, actually, isn't it? It's a way of making small amounts of training available, and I have to say that we have actually pushed it probably well beyond its limits. Our first phase is very much traditional Niche Academy things, very small tutorials, somewhere in the sort of, very short concepts, just a single concept, and away you go. Public libraries use them a lot for teaching people how to do simple searches on their catalogues or download an ebook or that sort of thing. And so, yes, Niche Academy was something that we had available, and we thought, well, we can use this. So I don't know. Is anything else I can tell you about it?
I think
maybe just to sorry, Thomas.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Maybe just to repeat that it's very easy to use. You can get to it from the RSC's Learning Resources page on the RDA Toolkit website. So the best thing, if you're curious, is just to click on the link, and then you'll see they're very accessible.
Okay. I think maybe to frame that issue would be to say that part of implementation is training and ongoing training. And so and we've discussed a lot in other presentations about application profiles, but I think the training piece to this is something that it might be worthwhile to share ideas as to the best approaches and so on. So whatever platforms, methods, and tools people are using, because one would think that they could be adaptable to other environments and so on. So there are questions from the panel. One more popped up in the Q&A as well. Okay. Oh, another one too. Sorry. Yes, we have an hour. We have another hour, I should say. Okay, let me read this question. Do you anticipate that catalogers will be referencing all of these documents, maps, official toolkit, mark docs in their, etc., in their everyday work, or will local documentation and familiarity with rules eliminate the need to reference more comprehensive guidance documents like the toolkit? I like that question because I was thinking of that, and it kind of related to the other question, the bouncing around, but at some point the day-to-day is likely going to be just driven by a very focused set of documents and guidelines.
I'll take this one because I feel quite strongly about that, and it's reflective of the way we have trained and the way that we have set up all of our documentation in the toolkit. Ev's presentation last week, if you can catch the recording of that to the RSC, demonstrated a lot more about how our documentation is structured and how we expect our cataloguers to use it. So there's always that kind of that disconnect between, ideal and reality. And then the ideal is the catalogers work in the toolkit for everything. They start with the documentation that Charlotte showed about the aggregate manifestations to decide what they have. They're sent to the right map. They work from that map, clicking from that map to the elements, following the process, coming back to the map for the next element. The guidance is in the toolkit, our encoding documents all in the toolkit, and that's our expectation, that's how catalogers work. But reality is that over time you get familiar with things and then you skip steps because you think, oh, I've been there before, I know what I'm doing. So the ongoing challenge is, of course, to keep people coming back to the toolkit, reading the option, reading the guidance, going to where they should do. And we're trying to improve our guidance documents with each release to make that a lot easier. People might have seen in earlier releases, our guidance document was just like, it was just a document, basically a Word document. We still have it available as a download if you want the whole thing, but that was quite difficult to work through because you would go to the guidance and then you would have to search for the element or the piece that you were looking for. So with the February release, we were able to put some infrastructure in place, and now we've got this lovely, you go to the guidance, you click the link, you go to the element that you need to go to. And we haven't got it so that you go exactly to the right place, but you are at the element. So if you're going from title proper, the element page, you're going to title proper in our guidance. So the next iteration is to go from the option that you're at on an element page directly to where you need to be in the guidance, so that it's as easy as possible for the catalogers to read what they need to read. And that's the kind of workflow we're building in. Yeah.
I think that's a good lead into another question. That's oh, I think oh, let's just see here. Okay. It's popped in a different section, but it's really about the language of RDA and it being a barrier, and terms like nomen. You mentioned the data provenance language, like metadata statement is a metadata work. Metadata description set is also metadata. So you have convergence of terms and so on. So I think, and this is reflective of a lot of the issues about the barrier, which the language itself is imposing upon users, catalogers, let's say, but even anyone who just wants to know what catalogers are doing. If they approach the toolkit and they see all of these terms and so on. So I guess they're looking for suggestions for trying to develop that clear understanding of those new terms and the way those terms are used. And I guess you would say you're starting from square one, but I think, are there maybe prerequisites for people approaching RDAs? There's things that maybe they should know before they even dive into RDA, such as maybe database language and computer terminology and things like that. Whoever wants to take that.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think it's really just about taking it slowly and taking it in bite-sized chunks. I think trying to understand the whole lot is overwhelming. And I think it is actually about taking those baby steps first, and because once you get your head around it, RDA tells you exactly what you've got. It's just when it does seem to be a big mouthful, but it actually and things like transferring from being messy about the concept of statement of responsibility and suddenly going, no, actually what I'm really talking about here is a statement of responsibility relating to the title proper. I'm not talking about any statement of responsibility. I'm talking about this particular one. And it is messy. It is a mouthful, but it tells you exactly what you are dealing with. So, and the example I always, yeah, I mean, we've had time to prepare people about this. And I think where I've said to people is that I've acknowledged that it's harder for those of us who started cataloging back in the 80s. But we had to learn. What the heck was main entry? It's not something that if you ask anybody on the main, and what was a statement of responsibility? What was a title proper? We actually had to learn, and back in those days, and we've forgotten. So we actually have to just be humble and start all over again. So yeah, I think that's, I don't know, anybody got anything else to add?
I think I'd just like to add, because a nomen came up, and nomen always comes up. It's okay to let some things just sit. Like, whoa, I don't understand nomen at this stage, but I don't really need I'll just put that down and I'll come back to it later after I've perhaps consumed some more easily digestible small bites, as Teresa put it. And then coming back once I've started to build comfort with other concepts. So yeah, I'd second that with what Teresa said. Don't try and I've got to know everything all at once. Just start with bite-sized. That's now phase one of our training.
Yeah, and I think that was the focus of our training, and that although yes, we do want people to understand the concepts, they don't need to understand everything about everything. And we did focus our training on what are the important things about this concept that a cataloguer needs to know to do their job? That intensive week that we had, that if you look at our training, I've repackaged it as videos, and I did say to all our wonderful senior staff who did that training, I said, in 5 minutes, I want you to take 5 minutes in your presentation to tell people about data provenance or entity boundaries or aggregates, whatever. And they did an excellent job. Really focusing down on what do you actually need to know? What are the broad concepts you need to know to start working with this? And the rest, if you really need to dive into it at a much deeper level, the rest will come later.
And there are I suppose, the reference sources that you can then dive into when later. And I know I've referred back to Chris Oliver's book on second edition on official RDA a number of times. Oh, how does Chris describe that? So yes, just do the things that you need at this point in time, but then refer back to some of those other reference sources that are out there as well, or go and look at another video that's available on the RDA YouTube channel. Oh, I know there was something there. Okay, let me find it. Now that makes a bit more sense, because as Anushka said, you've let it sit, you've gone and done other things, and then you've come back and taken it from there.
Okay, I do see a hand raise amongst the attendees, so I'm going to make an assumption. I have the power to allow people to speak. So this is Elizabeth Shoemaker. I do see the hand raised, and it's still raised. So I'm going to click the button and take the question. I'm not sure if they're unmuted on their end, or if she wants to proceed. Okay, I still see it as unmuted at this point. So, okay, there are a couple of other questions, and I still have some from the panelists too, but I'll take some of the questions here from the attendees. Okay, how different is this training strategy compared to the original RDA Toolkit's training strategy? And then the comment here is, when we did the RDA training initially, we knew it was a new set of rules. Now original to official RDA seems like an update, but your training strategy makes it look like you consider this training as much more significant than that. So I think it's you're comparing two different versions, so to speak, of the toolkit, and the training nature of each, and it's not just that it's different, but it's perhaps more significant, the official toolkit training.
I'm happy to start this one, and then team leaders can chime in. I think we did some pretty substantial training around original RDA. The difference for us, when we started looking at official RDA, it appeared as though this would be a very quick thing because we had our policies pretty much written and we could just transfer them. But the main difference is that original RDA was kind of like AACR2, in that you could just work through a set of instructions. It had some options, it had some exceptions that you could choose from, but basically it told you what to do. Official RDA is not laid out in that way, and so you need structure to help the cataloguer on the ground, and there are reasons for that, to help systems designers and to make it better for computers, but it does not make it better for the average cataloguer coming to the raw toolkit, because you've got nothing to start with. You have to know so much to begin, and so I think that is really why we had to make such a difference. And now I'll hand on to whichever of the team leaders want to talk.
know, I wasn't here for their first one, so I think Anushka probably better kick this off.
I don't know that I have much to add to that, Charlotte. I think it was good of you to highlight that the way the original toolkit is structured, it did make it, even though we had done quite a lot of work moving to original RDA to embed those concepts of the entities and the elements and the relationships and a different way of thinking about creating our descriptions, because of the way the original toolkit was laid out and the fact that we continued to work in Mark, I would say that over time we forgot a lot of that. Not all of our cataloguers, but for quite a lot of our cataloguers working in that sort of Mark first copy catalog, you stop thinking about it and you stop reading it. You stop having to go to the toolkit, and we took this shift as an opportunity to really stop and unpack those core concepts again, which haven't changed between original and official RDA, and just make sure that everyone was solid. And because we could see we needed everyone to be solid if we're going to move confidently into the next phase.
I think I have a good follow-up to that. I'll take the gist of the next question. I think you alluded to the idea that when you have to go to the toolkit, at some point, maybe you don't need to as much anymore. But let's say you do have to go to the toolkit. The question is around the language and the syntax of the guidance and the instructions, and the idea that there had been a criticism of the original toolkit to improve the intelligibility of that. And you're looking at the official toolkit, and it seems like you're kind of potentially back to square one because the syntax and the language itself looks problematic, suggesting somebody would want to rewrite it or of that. So that seems to be the concern, and it's a question of how you would approach that concern if you have to go back to the toolkit and you have to deal with that language.
I mean, our experience has shown, and you get used to it. I mean, Charlotte put it very strongly, and I'll put it strongly too. It's actually, yeah, it's hard at the start, but you get used to it. So, and it's just, at some point, you have to just dig in and go, look, I don't understand how ontologies work. This is an ontology. I need to upskill myself, and I need to understand it, and I'll do whatever I need as a learner to help me do that. And different people in our staff had different techniques for getting themselves over that learning hump. And in our small groups, we talked about the different concepts in different ways, and we talked about people's strategies for making sense, and the different ways that people did that. And over time, you get used to it, because at its core, it's logical. So once you've figured out how it works and what it means, it's not going to change.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That also reflects my own experience. You do have to look for those heuristics, I guess, your approaches to that. And I think some were alluded to in this presentation, such as the metadata statement, and the fact that Charlotte also presented the verbalized form, where you have the what you're describing has this or is this, the element name, which does carry the weight of the reason you're actually recording anything. It's in the element, right? It's not outside of the element. You don't sort of skip past RDA in that sense. The element itself is the reason you're recording anything. Then you move into the method of which you want to record a value for it, and then you're off to the races in terms of, is it a note, is it an access point, structured identifier, how is it going to be encoded, how is it going to be implemented? Huge set of issues, but at the beginning, it's a statement. You're making a statement about something, and there's thought behind that, and there's intent, and a lot of that it does carry forward from past practice and so on. So that's my advice, if I could contribute anything. But I do, Yeah, I do like the examples that was presented in Charlotte. I was nodding. I said, yes, you do have to approach it from that point of view. You can't just
Mm,
sort of block off the new terminology. You do have to
mm,
introduce it and present it as the method in which everything else will then follow from that,
mm.
right? So,
And I think you can try different ways. You can try different ways of actually getting people to understand those concepts. We have put some of our practical resources available as well. And so that metadata statements thing, we actually had some activities where people had a resource and they had cards, little cards with entity names and element names and possible values. And then so that it was actually engaging physically. And for some people, when they could see it out in a table, laid out on a table, they could see that this is my metadata statement, my card's making this, and then next to it, I've put my data provenance, that sort
right.
of thing. So sometimes, yeah, we're very text-based as catalogers often, but sometimes actually just getting into the, physical as well can really help people just get over that barrier of what do they actually mean when they talk about a metadata statement, or how does this all work together?
Yeah.
If I can just
Yep, go
go
ahead.
back to one other aspect of the question, which I took to be, what about people who aren't in there all the time and you go in? And I think it comes back to that same thing. If you engage with the language, you can kind of skim a lot of things and go, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, I'm fine. If it's very uncomfortable for you, if you're unfamiliar with it, it is going to be harder to just go in and get that one answer you needed. And so the benefit of putting the effort in to grasp the language, grasp the syntax, accept that it is very precise, it's just different, means that one time you have that really odd thing that's really weird and you just want to see, oh, is this the one where I do this or do I do that? You have to know the language to look for to find your answer. And so it's not so much about every time reading every word that deeply. It's about understanding because you know it and comfortable with it.
I just one more, just patterns, learning patterns. That's really been helpful because again, it's logical, the toolkit. And Charlotte did touch on access points being like, if you understand how an access point is constructed for one kind of entity, you'll understand how the access points are constructed for all kinds of entities, and understanding where there are patterns like that in the toolkit, that can help too.
I think that's a useful point, because I think you can parcel off big sections. This is all about access points, and that's, authority control and a whole bunch of things. So where I think people do continue to stumble over is the inverse elements, the ones that have the preposition at the ends and the ones that don't, and then have to kind of orient yourself. And then it seems like you have so many choices to make, because you also have hierarchies of elements too. And then you have to think, why is that the case? Because that really wasn't the case before. It's like you have too many choices now. So there is this another effort maybe of working your way through that. And even very similarly named elements, right? They have to be distinct because they're different things, but some of them have this phrase and some of that phrase, and you have to remember where they situate and what you're after. I do think that's something just people have to work through, whereas maybe other parts, people can just parcel that off. This all belongs to this part of cataloging, choosing vocabulary, etc., access point construction. That whole very large section can be moved out. And then if anything difficult that's remaining, yeah, you probably do have to spend a bit of time sorting through, getting what you need. And then once that's done once, hopefully that's done the last time for your practitioners and so on. So I'm going to
When it
move.
comes to those
Yeah,
inverse, just before you move on to those other questions, the
yeah,
inverses, the elements with very similar names, you mentioned it yourself, the verbalized labels are your best friend for that. Which value is this? Is it the thing I'm describing, or is it the thing I'm relating to? And when you put it into a sentence, that is a really key tip.
Yeah, I think, and that's a useful tip, and hopefully others will run with that from this session. So it's a really great point. So okay, so there are some other the panelists have had some questions. Some of them are just some practical questions, such as the links to the guidance from the policy statements. So there was a question about how you link from a policy statement to a guidance, and does it go to the exact section in the guidance, or are you taking them to the overall document and they have to do more searching? Or
No,
so it's a
no.
practical question.
If you're clicking from an option on the title proper element page and it says NLNZ guidance, you go to the guidance just for title proper. You do have to scroll down within that section to get to the right bit at the moment, but we've structured our guidance in a way so the headings are really clear, so you can tell which option you've come from. In a future release, we are going to make it so that when you click on an option, you go straight to the relevant option in the guidance. So it will be one-to-one, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay. All right. I think that's another interesting point, because this is also about not just best practices, but good design for training material and so on. And I think these ideas, wide distribution of these great ideas will be helpful. And there's just a few other small. Oh, does somebody want to
Sorry, Tom.
jump? Yeah.
Yes, Thomas, I'll just add on from what Anushka said about the guidance. Also, in our policy statements, if we are referring to either a string encoding scheme, once we get our bits of for an authorized access point or an access point, and it says go to a string encoding scheme, you click on that link, it will take you to that part of our string encoding scheme of how you put all of these elements together into the access point that we know, also with our VESs. So those documents are all linked, and it's the base from where you go is the toolkit. So you're in the toolkit, you go there, guidance, okay, you're in the toolkit, you need to go to the string encoding scheme, and it all hangs together. So you don't need to go off onto various other CMSs or your internal documentation or anything like that. It's when you're cataloging, you're in the toolkit.
I get the feeling we won't have time, but I could demonstrate that if need be.
Maybe hold the thought. We'll just work through maybe a couple of other questions there. Someone commented one of your earlier examples about the 240 or 245, 240, and so on, and they said, oh, it's also another element called the preferred title of work. So there's multiple hats a particular mark field can wear. Someone asked about the use of a subfield 3 in one of the examples. So I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, so the question was, why bother telling us what the information in the subfield 3 is? Why include that? The simple answer in that particular case is that you can have more than one file type for an archived item. So we might have archived something that has a cover image as a JPEG or a PNG, and then we've got the item itself is a PDF or an EPUB. And so because we've got multiple, we have repeated, and we want to be very clear in that particular example that we're talking about our archived copy, not necessarily the copy you just bought from Amazon.
Right. I just reminded me, subfield 3, there's an RDA element for that specifically, I think, too, right? Forgot it offhand. I found that the other day there. Okay. Let's just see. Okay, so some kind of repetitive questions about the transition, the number of people that were involved in training at all levels of staff knowledge were dealt with all at once, and the question about how many and so on. I don't know if there's any more to say about that.
There were, I believe, 21 of us in total. I think that number's right.
Okay, and I think about where you start from, and I think you did mention LRM entities. Let's see, did you? Now, I guess it's a question of comparisons between original and official, and how much time was spent on comparisons. What's changed? What's different?
I think it'd be fair to say we did very little. Um, we focused in the stuff that is available as phase 1 on language, on structure, on familiarization. We had, as Anushka had said, done some very intensive training when we first moved to original RDA, and then that had dropped off a bit. So there was a bit of refresher. Remember, this is what a work is, this is what an expression is. But we didn't really do a lot of comparison between original and official. We basically just said, this is it. And I think, while I did say, and it is entirely true, that we took the opportunity to really question everything we did, there is no reason why you can't use official RDA to get a result that looks exactly like what you currently have. And I think that sometimes gets lost. It's about understanding how to use the tool so that it suits you. And if what suits you is to continue doing exactly what you currently do, then you write your documentation to make that happen. And so how much you have to talk about original RDA probably depends on how much you have changed between original RDA and official RDA.
Yeah, actually the next question does kind of follow on that a little bit. It's that phrase you use, RDA first, encoding method comes after that. But when you say RDA first, you are talking about RDA metadata statements, or also you might call them triples. So then that's the question, that has to come first, right? And that is something that is different, right? And so it's that piece to it that I think is kind of sticking out in this particular question. You do have to take, when you use that phrase, it is introducing something new, but then it also, related to that is just, do people want to get past that and go right into what they're had been familiar with, which is mark encoding, or do they linger on a bit or spend more time thinking through, thinking of everything in terms of metadata statements first, making sure that's complete, and then moving on to encoding? So maybe it's a question about the how people are reacting to that.
I think
People, oh,
when you really think about it, AACR2 and Mark interacted together in the same way. AACR2 told you what you were doing, and Mark let you put it into the computer. It's just that once you get past the training phase, you forget which part belonged to which. You've just got it in your head, I'd put this here, and you jump. Because this structure is so new, I think it's even more important that we're really clear. And while National Library of New Zealand is currently using Mark 21 and we don't have an end date to that, we are looking forward to a time where Mark 21 does not dictate what our records look like. And we don't know what that would be, but the idea that if I have an RDA value, say title proper, I can translate that. I can crosswalk that into Mark, and I can crosswalk that into BibFrame, and I can crosswalk that into Dublin Core, and I can crosswalk that into Triple Store. It doesn't matter because the value is still the same. And that's where we really emphasized RDA first. If you understand what it is you're trying to say about this thing you're describing, then how it looks at the end is a secondary thing. And I cut off Teresa, so I'm going to pass back.
no, I was just going to, now, have I lost my train of thought? RDA first. Oh, right, yes, I was going to say, one of the things that we encouraged people to, about the triples, because you hear triples and people go, what's a triple? I don't understand this. But at our intensive, we had what is traditionally seen as an icebreaker, where you get a little sheet and you have to find a person who has a certain different characteristics, if you know those, human bingo. And it was actually really useful, that exercise, because the people who looked at that and went, this is triples. Teresa has eye color blue. This is a triple. And the people who could actually just do that and realize this is why you're asking us to do it. It's not just a fun thing to get us started in the morning. It's actually showing us that we use triples all the time to describe things. It's just that we tend to wrap them up in language quite a bit. So once you see triples, you can't not see them. You just see them all the way. So that sort of thing, just approaching it that way can help as well.
Okay. Another question. I guess this has to do, the question really is about implementation timing and the relationship of training to that, where I mean, it's been described as rolling implementation, something happening a year later, year and a half later. Is there concern about people forgetting in relation to the timing of the training and the nature and staging of any implementation and rollout?
Our biggest gap was between phase 1 and phase 2, and that's because Christmas coincides with our summer holiday. So that was the biggest gap, and we gave people reading matter as they came and went for their summer holidays. But essentially, once we started in that phase 2 intensive, and then straight into practical, people were working all the time, and it built. And I think probably the hardest point was the last month or so, where people were very much in official RDA, but still having to use original RDA in their work. And that was probably the most confusing point. It really sort of gave us a real impetus towards, yes, let's implement so we don't have to think in two ways at the same time.
That's, yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, you may as well just cut everything and move. There's a point where you have to, I guess, make that decision, right? Where it just becomes easier to just proceed with something rather than trying to balance.
And that actually is the point. If it wasn't clear, we when we implemented the 1st of August, there was no more original RDA. If we couldn't catalogue it in official RDA, we didn't catalogue it. It just had to build up. And yes, we are dealing with those issues with backlogs, but we're catching up.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just picking up on that AACR2 and original RDA and fleshing that out a bit. Yes, I've still got AACR2 in my head, but when I started engaging, as I think a lot of us, and official RDA, original, when you started engaging with official RDA, that is what you engage with, and AACR2 now is past. You just leave it there in the past. The same now with original RDA. I probably couldn't even give you an original RDA rule number. I wouldn't have a clue, because I know the element. The element I'm looking for is manifestation file type. The element I'm looking for is expression content type. That's what I'm looking for. And it becomes a pattern, and by just concentrating on official RDA, concentrating on the standard that you now have in front of you, the other stuff, yes, well, it's historical, and as we've all learnt new standards, it's sort of, the historical stuff sort of just peters away in a way. So as Teresa said, yes, the most difficult part was when we had to do both. And Anushka, I'll handball it over to you.
I just want to say that sometimes you have to be deliberate and conscious about letting it go. And I'd say that's come up for us a few times in our policy discussions, where we're stuck on an issue and we can't find a way forward, and we realise it's actually, we just can't find a good reason for doing something. It's because we've been doing it since, AACR2. And then we have to really go, do we still need it in this current context? And sometimes it's really hard just to say, no, we don't need that anymore. We just
Right.
will let it go because we
Yeah.
can't carry everything forward.
Yeah. I think the only well, one reason maybe would be if you come across an old record and you look at the values and they were those values were determined not by ACR2 but maybe the precursor of ACR2, right? The abbreviations and the Latin and things of that sort. So it might be useful just as an explanation for this data, but I guess it's teaching people that that's not the value you're going to actually use going forward. That's kind of where you do need to make that separation. But I still hang on to the old print volumes for that rare occasion when why did they do that back then? And there would be an explanation if you look up the old rules. But then the decision, do you upgrade the record and just remove that? And then, yeah. So a few more questions here. Just a question about the kinds of material you're using for training: videos, presentations, in person, in the office training. What's the general mix or ratios, let's say, between those different methods?
We use everything. We've attempted to sort of cover everything. So as Charlotte said in the presentation, we tended to have webinars at the beginning of the week, and so people can and do work from home from time to time. So we went for the webinar format for that, so that everybody got to see everything at the same time, no matter where they were. And as she said, they were recorded so that people could go back and some people, when they were doing the activities, did actually have the webinar playing, and they because we had demonstrations, and so they would, when they were doing their activity, they would go step by step with the webinar, the recorded webinar, following it through. The small groups, we encouraged them to be in the room together, but they weren't always, particularly when, I mean, Charlotte's a remote worker and all the time. So, and then I say for the physical activities, obviously you had to be in the office to do them. So we did have a combination of physical activities, like there were several, like the metadata statement, one that I just talked about for. We had some for, we had a collection of those, and I think I have described them as activities in a bag, and I've described some of them in the resources tutorial or on Niche Academy. The resources there, I think there's physical activities there, and I've sort of described them so you can create your own.
Yeah, that's a useful point, because I think that wasn't thought of when the question was posed. The physical activities that you could actually incorporate as part of your training methods. That's very useful. Okay, we're getting. Yes. Oh, and I have instructions about the raised hand. There's another raised hand. Okay, so the instruction is if people have raised their hand, they should type their questions in. I finally got to this as of about 30 minutes ago when that was entered there. So I do see some people with hands there. So if they can type in the question that they have, yes. So there might still be some questions from the attendees. I still have a few things. I think really it's just another question here, just the amount of time, like when you have this, the official toolkit, and you have, and I think you were alluding to it, many of the points you were raising about how much time you have to set aside, sort of the downtime that occurs, I guess, with productivity loss and so on. So I think you have kind of addressed that to this point here. But I guess there is that concern about being overwhelmed by the speed of changes and how much time this is going to take from people's day-to-day routines and so on, and where they can fit the training in. And I think across the board, I mean, it may vary from institution to institution as well, right? So I'm not sure if you want to add anything more to that point, but that's an interesting issue to discuss.
Yeah, perhaps I'll just quickly add in, Anushka and Teresa or Charlotte can add further. It's, yes, there's some downtime, but there's downtime in learning anything new. You get a new library management system, you will have downtime as staff learn how to use that. You get a new workflow or a process in your larger organisation. There will be downtime or what would say a loss of productivity while people learn how to use that. So by putting in time into the learning, and I did have a staff member who had come from another organisation, and what she appreciated the most was the time that we gave staff to actually learn. She said she'd never had that before, but she could learn at her pace. She could go back and review the videos, and she did again and again. And she could really build that strong, solid foundation. And I think it's building, if you build a strong, solid foundation, and I keep using the analogy, you build it in stone. And yes, foundations are often hidden under things, and that's why they're not seen. But you build a strong foundation, and anything you build on top of that will hold. You build a foundation effectively of sand and it'll just go away. You can put all the wonderful front ends and bells and whistles, but unless you've got the data there, unless the data is accurate, unless it's granular enough, you can't do the fancy stuff. So giving that bit of time, and now we're picking up. There might have been a short period of time when we may not have got a record through, but people started getting records through, and yes, it was slow, but it's now steadily been picking up and will continue to pick up.
Mm-hmm. There's another point related to that, I would say. The concern is about backlogs, and the observation is that to get through backlogs, people just have to start with the coding system that they know, and that ends up being kind of perhaps a circular process where they have to then step outside of that process to then learn something new and then step back into that. But there's a link being made here to the pressure about clearing backlogs and the general pressure of just the amount of material to catalog, and that is tied to the encoding system in place at that time. Obviously, library systems, when you upgrade and migrate, that produces a similar effect, I would think. So maybe it's analogous to that. So the question then, like, is this the case? Is this something where there are trade-offs that no matter the best efforts that backlogs have built up a bit, and maybe now you're coming back to kind of dealing with them, but
yes,
yeah, okay,
yes, and with everything I would argue you would have a trade-off, but as I said, going back, we're giving that strong training to people now. They can just keep going forwards. They don't have to sort of go, oh, I'm not sure, what was that again? And have to go back and then go forwards again. They just can keep moving forwards because they are comfortable in what they're doing. They're comfortable in picking up, a resource. Oh, I know how to do that. And off they go. Something else I was going to say, and I've lost my train of thought. Charlotte, I'll leave it to you and I'll come back to what I was.
I was just going to say, I think the trade-offs have to be part of your training plan. I mean, in a different context, I'm an advisor to a public library consortium. They will not be able to undertake the training in exactly the same way as the National Library did. They simply cannot do that. But it's about making a choice on what is going to work for an institution. And maybe that choice is we will use original RDA for everything except this stuff, and we'll just start with this stuff. That's the kind of thing we did when we transitioned from AACR2 to original RDA. We said, well, you know, we don't want to stop work on those materials, but we're not ready to change on them yet. We're going to start with this. And you can make those decisions as part of your transition plan. There is no rule that says because National Library of New Zealand put a stop date and changed everything all at once and everything just built up, we have to do it too. That is not true. But it is part of the planning, and you have to think ahead and think about how many people am I dealing with? Do we work together? Do we work at a distance? What methods are going to be used? All of this is actually absolutely vital beyond the training itself in terms of doing it effectively, because you know your own system, you know what you are capable of, you know what you can do. So don't feel that we're saying everyone must stop and just do what we did. You have to figure it out in
Yeah.
relation to what's practical.
Yeah, I'm seeing another kind of question emerge in my head listening to that and looking at it, some related comments here. Did official toolkit, some of the new concepts, let's say aggregates, did that introduce categorizations that changed how you approached your workflow and backlog and so on? Related to that is, did it produce new flow charts for how did you go back and rethink how you approached your backlog, the amount of material you have to deal with in terms of, oh, well, I'm going to use this map, this term, this category. I'm going to use this to process this because I can group it better this way, or I can approach it better this way. So I don't know if that's a fair observation or whether that reflects the experience or so on, but I do see some points kind of related to that in terms of flow charting and whether or not the official toolkit does introduce those possibilities, because you can categorize your material in certain ways and say it fits better this application profile, and we can gather things up and create a workflow around that more efficiently or more effectively. So
Short answer,
Perhaps.
yes.
yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity now that we've got our core structures in place, and we have got a backlog built up, and yes, we can see opportunities for carving out certain kinds of resources and being very deliberate and streamlined about the elements that we use to describe those resources. So that's giving us some opportunities there, because once we've identified like a core set of elements for a particular kind of resource that we commonly see in our workflows, then we have opportunities for automating that workflow too, making more use of supplied metadata and programmatic workflows. So as soon as you kind of can structure and you can standardize, you get the opportunities there for increased productivity. But we could only do that by stopping and really seeing, what we could do.
Right. I think you did also allude in your presentation, it wasn't just a matter of relearning the same things, but you also looked at the encoding and the results of what you're producing and saying, as a result of the official toolkit and the way these elements are structured, we can do something differently now. I think it was related to the exit point for work, for example, authorized exit point for work question. So that then you have to train people on that improvement. Like it seems
Absolutely.
like there's and you also mentioned it's an iterative process. So it's not, when you say implementation, a lot of this is a bit about training, but implementation seems to me the other part to that is utilizing what's now possible, what's available, and constructing workflows that ultimately and results that ultimately are better. I do see even a question here about artificial intelligence, and that presumably at various points that could be part of a workflow somewhere because it's maybe broken out in different ways now and so on. So okay.
Yeah,
We
I think we're probably running out of time, but I think in terms of aggregates, that was a challenging one to get our head around, possibly less due to the model and more due to trying to get our heads around what do we currently do and how do we get a result that will still work for us, and does it need to change? And so when you look at our aggregates guidance document, you need to be aware that what that document does is not teach you about RDA aggregates. It teaches you about what National Library of New Zealand wants to do with aggregates so that we can make aggregates useful in our descriptions. And if I can give a very brief example, if you think of a recipe book, each recipe in that book is its own work. Obviously, the author didn't sit down one day with a pen and start writing the first recipe and then move on to the second. That's not the way recipe books work. But there is no value at the National Library of New Zealand to treat those as collection aggregates where we can list every recipe. We might do a table of contents, but we wouldn't expect someone to come in and say, have you got the pikelet recipe by so-and-so, specifically the one they wrote in 2003. No one does that. However, they might come in and say they want the poem by this poet. And so we've made decisions within the aggregates model that then flow through to how we want to describe things. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that when you do it, you do the same thing. So you can end up with the same result. The question is how far you're going to question why. So you said, yes, we have led to new things. We had to teach those new things because we've taken a new approach. If you don't take a new approach, you won't automatically come to those conclusions because you haven't taken a new approach. So it doesn't have to be part of your initial implementation. The final thing I'd like to say about aggregates is that if you choose not to engage with the aggregates model, you have not fully implemented official RDA. You might have RDA aligned records. You might have records that kind of look like official RDA records, but you're not actually doing it until you've engaged with it. And so we may put special effort into that. And if you do look at our non-RDA mark section in the encoding document, one of the things we do is when we're editing records, because you have to edit old records, and old records use a number of different things, just as an internal practice that does not get sent out when we migrate our records to anyone else. We identify this is an official RDA record, this is kind of a hybrid original, and this is something else. This is just, it was a different thing and we've done something to it. We had to edit it so that we can tell which ones are truly official RDA. Sorry, carry on.
No, that's actually a good point to, well, perhaps almost conclude on. So I will start the wrap up. We only have a few minutes here. Just a few other comments. They love the human bingo that was described earlier. And they would like, and again, the point about sharing this, that's come up a few times in some of the comments and questions here. And I think people are interested in what you've done and would love to have this stuff shared and then and adapt it for people then can adapt it for their own purposes. Okay, and a comment here, cue the music, let it go, let it go. Let the old stuff go. Anyways, okay, we're at the end of this great NARDAC spring forum. I see the applause emojis rising. So I want to say thank you all for being such great panelists and presenters, and I want to thank the attendees and thanks to Jamie for putting this on. And with that, I will bid everyone a good evening, good morning, farewell. Let's say farewell. So goodbye, everyone. So we're going to stop the recording now and everyone can sign off. And let's